Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the 22nd part of What If Deku Had a Robot Wolf. I hope you enjoy. Link to the original story and author in the description. Chapter 22, Old and New. Mother! Izumi ran into Muzutafu General Hospital, Durandal rushing in beside her. Blossom calmly followed the panicked girl inside, having come along for security reasons. Izumi was in a panic. All she had been told was that her mother had been involved in a villain attack and that whilst she was physically fine, she was admitted to Muzutafu General Hospital due to complications. But she wasn't told what those complications were. She hadn't said no to 3ES offer to sing for the opening titles, just postponed the audition for a bit. She'll get back to them at a later date. This was a family emergency. Izumi, please. Calm yourself, Kanto said gently, placing a hand on the worried girl's shoulder. I'm sure your mother is fine. Cough cough. Izumi shivered. You don't know that. They didn't tell me what happened to her. Maybe they didn't tell you because the situation is still developing. Cough cough, or they're not sure what happened. Kanto said. I'm sure you'll find out what happened to her in due time. But you can't just cough cough rush in there. You may cause more harm than good. Izumi turned towards Kanto. She knew what the hero was saying was true, but still, she still worried about her mother. Especially after what happened at the USJ. She did kick the league's leader, well, who she thought was the leader, in the face. So when she heard her mother was involved in a villain attack, she feared that the league were behind the attack. If her mother died because of her actions, she would never forgive herself. Come now, Izumi. I will escort you to your mother, Kanto said gently. Izumi took a few deep breaths to calm herself down. Thank you. Kanto proceeded to escort Izumi and Durandal to the room where Inko was resting, but her desire to see her mother made her anxious. So when the door came into view, she left Kanto's side. Mother, she said as she barged into the room and quickly turned towards her mother, laying in bed in a medical gown and looking different. What? She wasn't short or plump as her father liked to call her. Instead, she was now tall and slim and lacked many of the wrinkles she used to have. She looked younger. Mother? Izumi said, shocked by her mother's sudden change of appearance. Izumi, Inko said with a relieved smile. Even her voice sounded younger. I'm glad to see you are all right. Yeah, same for your. Izumi said as she walked over to the bed and sat on it beside her mother. What happened to you? I got younger, Inko replied. I was affected by a quirk that made me younger by about a decade. Izumi's eyes went wide. A quirk made her mother younger? This was both very interesting and terrifying. Such a quirk could turn someone into a baby, or worse. Well, it is good to see that you cough are in good health, Kanto said. I am the pro hero Blossom, but you can call me Kanto Iza. Cough. I'm a teacher at UA. A teacher? Inko said, looking surprised. Well, I'm glad you came here. But it wasn't really necessary. As that may be. Izumi would not have been allowed to leave UA without a pro hero to accompany them. For security reasons, Kanto said. I see, Inko said. Well, I'm glad that you and the rest of the UA staff are looking after her. Kanto nodded, smiling behind her mask. Ah, the joys of motherhood, such a wonderful experience. It was just a shame it was something she could never experience herself. We are teachers. It is our job to ensure our students are safe. So, would you be able to tell us what happened? I'll try, Inko replied before she explained everything that happened to her during the attack. Having a young girl run into her and accidentally used her quirk, before being paralyzed by a young boy around Izumi's age, then a man with a plague mask appeared threatening to kill them and take the girl away, and how she had threatened to castrate the man. That got a confused look from Izumi. She also said that the girl knew her name after I called the police. The boy told me the girl was called Eri, and that her quirk allowed her to rewind people to a previous state. He put a lot of emphasis on making people younger. It was only after that did I realize that I myself was younger. She explained. The doctors aren't really sure how this happened and are running tests just to be sure. So the boy had some kind of paralysis quirk whilst the girl had some form of de-aging quirk, Izumi muttered, writing down notes in a notebook. The girl had a cut cheek and the boy had blood on his knife, but it clearly didn't come from the man because he wasn't bleeding despite having a knife in his chest. Did the boy deliberately cut the girl's cheek? If he did, why? Does his quirk require him to consume the blood of someone to paralyze someone? She muttered before a dark thought crossed her mind. She had heard of an ability that sounded very similar to what she just described. From witness testimonies of pro heroes who sustained career-ending injuries at the hands of one man. She looked up at her mother. The young girl had made her mother younger by an unknown number of years, but by the sounds of things, she wasn't the only one affected. "You okay, Izumi? Izumi?" Inko asked, sounding worried. "What?" "Oh yes, I'm fine," Izumi replied. "I'm just worried about your mother. You got attacked and I was worried it was a member of the League out for revenge. I just don't want to lose you." Inko smiled as she rested a hand on Izumi's shoulder. "Don't worry, dear, I'll be fine. That man didn't even lay a finger on me." "That's because you threatened to rip his testicles off," Durandal remarked seriously. "What do you have against testicles?" "Nothing," Inko replied with a smile. "Anyway, Izumi, I can assure you, I'm fine. You won't be losing me anytime soon. I'll make sure of it, right, Hisashi?" Izumi's eyes went as wide as they could. She slowly turned her head around towards the door, spotting a man with short fluffy red hair with freckles on his face, wearing a black shirt, thick brown trousers and black boots, standing in the doorway. The man smiled. "Hey girls. Did I miss anything?" Izumi's face instantly lit up. "Father," she said as she leapt forwards, arms outstretched as Hug tackled her father. "It's so good to see you." Hisashi smiled as he scooped up his daughter. "It's good to see you as well, Izumi," he said with a smile. "I'm sorry that I couldn't have been here when you needed me the most." Izumi smiled as tears formed around her eyes. "It's okay, father. I'm just glad that you're here now," she said. She loved her father. He was always supportive of her no matter what happened. Every day since the incident he sent her an email with words of encouragement, as well as special gifts to help her feel better. He was over the moon, almost literally, when he found out that she had gotten onto the hero course. "That I am," Hisashi said, even if it was only for a week. Seeing his daughter in person always made his day brighter. He looked up at Inko, who was smiling as well. "So, you look to have lost some weight," he said, sounding slightly disappointed. She looked younger, yes, but she wasn't as cuddly as she was before. "I believe I've lost more than just weight," dear Inko replied. "If the doctors are right, I've gotten younger by approximately a decade." "A decade, huh?" Hisashi remarked. "Well, I'd ask if I could lose a few years as well. But I feel like that would be a bad idea." Inko nodded. "I was told that the girl who did this has very little control over her quirk. I was lucky that I only lost a decade," she said. "I'm more worried about the 2 children who were there. Eri looked so scared, and the boy was bleeding badly." "I'm sure they're fine," Hisashi said. "They're at the hospital as well, aren't they?" he asked, getting a nod from Inko. "Then I'm sure they're fine. Right, Izumi?" Izumi nodded. She was still worried about the boy who was involved in the attack. She had a theory, but she'd need to meet the boy, just to confirm it. She was just glad her mother was alright. Hisashi smiled before he turned towards Durandal. "Glad to see you still around looking after my daughter." Durandal nodded. "I haven't left her side since we met," he said before an alarm sounded throughout the hospital. "Attention patients and staff. A villain attack is currently underway nearby. All patients are advised to remain inside and away from the windows," a voice said before there was an almighty crash outside. "That's a bit too close to call it nearby." "That's right on their front door," Hisashi remarked before he turned towards Inko. "You sure you'll be alright here?" Inko smiled. "I'll be fine. It's Izumi that you should be worried about." Hisashi smiled as he looked to where his daughter should be, and found her gone. "Of course," he said before he looked over towards the window, noticing that Izumi had her face pressed up against the window, looking outside at the fight going on outside. Down on street level, the hero Death Arms was fighting a villain with grey skin and wearing a tattered cloth mask, a red scarf, baggy pants, and 4 large ethereal fists. Death Arms' sidekicks were keeping people back. Izumi frowned. She recognized that attire. It was a stained fanatic, someone who claimed to follow the hero killer stain in his crusade against false heroes. Unfortunately, these fanatics act nothing like the hero killer and just go about trying to kill every pro-hero and sidekick they find. Unfortunately for Death Arms, the villain's ethereal fists were not constrained by arms, so he had to deal with not only the villain's normal fists but also 4 ethereal fists punching him from random angels. Suffice to say, Death Arms was getting overwhelmed. And anyone who went to try and help him punched away. "Is this really the best you got?" the villain shouted, throwing fist after fist at Death Arms. "And here I thought you were supposed to be strong," he shouted before he smashed all 4 of his ethereal fists into Death Arms, sending the hero into and through a truck before smashing into a wall. Izumi gasped. Whilst she wasn't a big fan of Death Arms after what happened with the sludge villain, he was still a pro-hero. She quickly turned towards Kanto, who was standing beside her. "Can't you do something to help him?" Kanto turned her head towards Izumi. "I already have." Back on the street, Death Arms groaned as he tried to pull himself out of the wall he was punched into, all the while the villain approached him. "Face it, you're dead fake." The villain taunted as he approached. "Maybe you should pray for a young girl to come to do your job dash," he said before someone high-kicked him in the head and sent him stumbling away. "Well, haven't you been naughty?" a haughty voice said seductively. The villain quickly recovered and looked up at the new threat, and instantly blushed. Before him stood a curvaceous woman with a body on par with Midnight. She had black hair and brown eyes and was wearing a white bunny girl outfit, with dark gray stockings, black high heel shoes, and a white half-face bunny mask. There was also the whip she was holding, just putting that out there. Who the fuck are you?" the villain demanded with a slight blush on his face. The newcomer smiled seductively. "You can call me Bunny," she replied as she cracked her whip against the ground. She then flicked her whip forwards, coiling it around the man's neck. With a powerful tug, she brought it back, pulling the villain down onto the ground hard. "Now be a good boy and stay down." The villain, to the shock of everyone else present, complied. His 4 ethereal fists disappeared as he put his hands on his head. Bunny smirked as she reduced the tension around the villain's neck and pulled the whip away, just as 2 of Death Arms' sidekicks rushed up to apprehend him. Once the man was restrained, Bunny moved over to Death Arms and helped him out of the wall. "Thanks," Death Arms said as he was pulled out of the wall, with a slight blush on his face. Bunny gave him a seductive smirk. "No problem. Just helping a fellow hero out," she cooed before she turned and walked off towards one of the barricades, where a large group of reporters had gathered, swaying her hips seductively. "I'll deal with the media. No doubt they're dying to get to know me a bit more." "Yeah, sure," Death Arms said, his blush a lot more noticeable. "Looks like Midnight has some competition." Meanwhile, back in the hospital, Izumi was both intrigued and blushing like mad. A new hero just debuted, and she was interested to see what the woman's quirk was. But then there was the woman's costume and attitude, which was just as bad as Midnight. She was also not considering asking the support department to develop a bunny suit version of her hero costume. Nope, totally not considering that. She was kind of disappointed that she didn't see the new hero's quirk in action, plus, due to the distance, she didn't know her hero name. But that could be solved easily by watching the news report of the fight later. She was also in a unique position to see something everyone else missed, a small swarm of black cherry blossom flying past and depositing the bunny girl hero discreetly on a nearby roof. That was interesting. That meant that Kanto not only knew this new hero but also had her on standby, probably on Nizu's orders. She'd have to ask about her later. Plus there was something familiar about the women. Like she'd seen her somewhere before. "So, anything interesting happening down there?" Hisashi asked, having stayed beside Inko. "Yep," Izumi replied, turning around with a smile on her face and causing her to forget about her previous musing. "A new hero just debuted. I don't know her name and I didn't see her use her quirk. But I can look into her more later." "That's good to hear," Hisashi said with a smile as he ruffled his daughter's hair. Kanto smiled behind her mask as she made her way towards the door. "I'll leave you 3 to get cashed up," she said as she walked out, waiting for the door to close before speaking again. "It seems our new friend has taken to the hero business quite well." "Quite so," Nizu said, smiling as he stood beside the door. "She's still going to need some more training, but now that she's made her debut we can have her sign on to UA's hero refresher program. he said. You know, she's a lot like you in a way. Kanto chuckled as she crouched down to allow Nizu to jump onto her shoulder. Come now, Nizu. You of all people should cough know that I am nothing like her. Quite so, Nizu said as he made himself comfortable on her shoulder. Once secure, Kanto walked off towards the secure wing of the hospital. The principal of unusual size was here to visit two rather interesting young individuals. Normally he wouldn't be interested in two victims of a minor villain attack, but Detective Naomasa Tsukachi had called him about two young children who worried him. They worried him a lot. And after Naomasa told Nizu about them, the principal was worried. Their first stop was the young girl, Eri. There were some confusing reports regarding the girl and he wanted to see her himself to confirm a few things. Eri had been put into a private room, which had two people standing outside, a police officer and Shota Aizawa. Kanto nodded her head as she approached, walking up to Shota and allowing Nizu to leap onto the tired man's shoulder. Thank you, Kanto, Nizu said with a smile. You're welcome, Kanto replied. Now, if you can excuse me, I have to return to my charges. I will see you when we return to the school, she said before she turned and walked back to Inko's room. So, shall we? Nizu said with a smile. Shota nodded before they entered the room, finding the young girl Eri laying back in bed. Greetings, Eri, Nizu said as they entered the room. Am I a mouse, a dog, or a bear? Nizu Eri replied quietly, but her mouth did not move. Your Nizu, principal of UA, she said before shifting her focus to Shota, and he's Shota Aizawa. The pro-hero eraser head. Nizu smiled whilst Shota remained indifferent. Yes, indeed I am. How did you know that? The voices told me, Eri replied quietly. Once more her mouth did not move, yet Nizu and Shota could hear her speak. I hear them, always. They tell me people's names, what they're thinking, what they're going to do. How they're going to hurt me, she cried as all the objects in the room started to rattle. And, what are these voices telling you now? Nizu asked with a smile. Pain, people are in pain. But no one wants to harm them, Eri replied as the objects settled down. That there are people who want to make them stop feeling that pain. That they want to heal everyone. That you want to help me. That's good to hear, Nizu said. This is a hospital, people do get better here. You have no need to fear the staff here, he said with a friendly smile. So, how long have you been hearing these voices? I've always heard them. Even before my curse came in, Eri replied. Nizu frowned. She called her quirk a curse, meaning she had a negative view of it. That was not a healthy view to have. He'd have to fix that if he had any hope of helping this girl control her powers. But, to be able to read minds from the get-go, was concerning. They had already been informed by Naomasa that Eri showed signs of severe abuse, and was also somehow able to not only read people's minds but also showed being able to use telekinesis as well and communicate via telepathy. And this was on top of being able to rewind people. She was shockingly powerful but lacked any sort of control over her quirk. There was also something else that was concerning. Nizu and Shota quickly shared a glance before Shota activated erasure. And now? You're trying to see if you can silence the voices. But you can't, Eri replied. No one can. I've tried and tried, but I can't silence them, she shivered, as the objects in the room shuddered once more. Nizu nodded as Shota deactivated erasure. So the detective was right, her telepathy and telekinesis aren't quirks. It should have been obvious that they weren't since she said she was born able to read people's minds, but it was always good to double-check. This was a confusing conundrum. There were plenty of people out there in the world who could easily do what Eri was doing right now, but those were still quirks. They could still be deactivated by quirk nullification tech or erasure. And yet, Eri was still able to access those abilities, even when under the effects of something that should stop her. Which was probably for the best, since telepathy seemed to be her only means of communication. Eri was an anomaly, her abilities defied all logic. Her rewind ability was clearly a quirk, but the telepathy, mind reading, and telekinesis weren't. So many questions and no one to ask them. And he doubted Eri had the answers he wanted. But, if word of her got out, then there would be a large number of groups who would want to get their hands on her. Groups like Raft or the League of Villains. He will need to keep this girl safe. Luckily, he knew exactly how. But first, he will need to get her out of here, which won't be difficult. Making her a ward of UA is a trivial thing. Finding someone to look after her, however, will be difficult. An idea entered his head. It could work, but he would have to be careful about it, plus he needed more information about Eri and the other boy. But, it would work. You think Inko will be a good choice for someone to look after me, Eri said quietly, but why do you want to help me? I'm cursed. Nizu smiled. Eri was very observant, probably from having to shift through people's thoughts all the time to make sense of them. He wondered, what else did she know about those around her? Eri Nizu said softly, you have an incredible gift. You have a powerful quirk, as well as other powerful abilities. But, I can see that you have been through some terrible ordeals, he said. I know what it's like to be experimented on, to be treated as nothing more than a lab rat in some madman's pet project. But, you're away from those responsible for what happened to you, and, if you want to, I can take you somewhere where you will be safe. So, what do you say? Yes, Eri replied quickly, but Nizu could tell that she had already known what he was going to ask her and had already made her decision, but had waited for him to finish before replying, but only if Inko is the one to look after me. Her voices are kind and caring. She's smart too, Nizu thought as he nodded. I'll see what I can do, he said with a smile. It'll take time, but I can assure you, you will be completely safe here, he said. Now, I need to speak to a few other people, but I will be back soon, he said before. Don't be too harsh on Kaizome, Eri said just as they were about to leave. I wouldn't be here without him. Kaizome Akaguro, also known as the hero killer, Stain, who was currently 15 years old and resting in a nearby and more secure room. No doubt he came under the effect of Eri's quirk. He already knew Stain's story, but he would like to hear it for himself. Don't worry, Eri, I will be lenient to him, Nizu said before they left the room and headed towards their next destination. Kaizome's room was a lot more secure than Eri's room, with 2 armed police officers standing outside. No one from Tartarus, since he wanted to try something first before informing them that Stain had been apprehended. One of the officers nodded as they approached, unlocking the door and opening it for them. Inside lay a 15-year-old Stain, wearing a medical gown and handcuffed to the hospital bed he was in. There was also another officer inside, armed as well. Despite looking young, Kaizome was still a dangerous killer. Kaizome's eyes glared towards them as they walked in. Nizu, he growled. Ah, so you know who I am, Nizu said with a smile. Well, that makes things easier for us. Now, should I call you Stain, or Kaizome? Kaizome maintained eye contact with Nizu. Stain. Who's the hero with you? I'm Eraserhead. I'm an underground hero, Shota replied. An underground hero, Stain said with a smile. I respect your lot more than the others. Undergrounds by nature don't seek the limelight, focusing their efforts on helping people instead of seeking glory. Yes. And that includes taking down villains like you, Shota said with a scowl. Stain smiled even more. And I expect nothing less from you, he said. So, what brings the principal of UA here? Argonaut, Nizu replied. Stain frowned. I am nothing like that murder, he growled with murderous intent. No, you are not, Nizu said, but you are the only person I know of who fought Argonaut to a standstill and survived. Stain looked surprised. How did you know that? He asked. There were no witnesses, no security cameras. We were fighting underground, for crying out loud. No one could have seen or known about that fight. And yet, I do, Nizu said with a smile. Do you want to know how I know about the fight? He asked. Stain nodded quickly. It's quite simple really, I'm the principal. Everyone else in the room groaned. Nizu was not good with jokes, especially when he reused the same joke over and over again. Stain shook his head. If you want me to fight Argonaut, that may be a problem. I'm not as old as I used to be, he said, looking down at his body. This body I'm in now is not as strong or as developed as it was when I fought Argonaut 2 years ago. Even with my quirk, I would not survive a second encounter with the man in my current state. And yes, I am aware that he was involved in the USJ attack and was the one who killed 13. I had great respect for her. She used such a destructive quirk to save people. She was a true hero. Well, that is unfortunate. Nizu said you were affected by Eri's quirk, weren't you? How did you come across her? I already gave the police my statement, Stain responded calmly. I know that, Nizu said with a smile. I want to hear it from you. Stain sighed. It started about a month ago. I was hunting the pro hero Breakdown, who was using his status to help smuggle Trigger into the country. I caught him when he was meeting with his contact, and attacked, he said, no point sugarcoating what he had done. He was an honest man, unlike the many fakes out there. His contact shot me, but it was an odd sort of bullet that hit me. It didn't even penetrate. I didn't think much of it at the time, but as the fight went on, I quickly realized that my quirk wasn't working. After I killed Breakdown, I confronted the smuggler and made him talk about the bullet. He said it was a quirk erasure bullet, designed to temporarily remove someone's quirk. After I killed the smuggler, I spent the next 3 weeks tracking down the source of these bullets, bringing down several smuggler groups in the process. Nizu frowned. This was worrying. Someone was developing quirk erasure bullets. He wouldn't have believed it if Stain wasn't carrying several of them on his person, as well as the source of the bullets. Why did you spend so much time tracking down the source of these bullets? Shota asked. Because bullets that can erase quirks are far too dangerous. Especially if someone makes a permanent version, Stain replied. Just think, the delicate balance of power we currently have will be ruined if villains can take away a hero's quirk, he explained. Anyway, I eventually found who was making them, a Yakuza group called the Shai Hasaikai. I attacked them whilst their leader Overhaul was out, trying to find out how they were making these bullets and put a stop to it. Imagine my horror when I realized how they were making them. By drawing blood from Eri and using it to make bullets, Nizu said. He had read Stain's statement. He was horrified by what this Overhaul had been doing to this young girl, draining her blood and putting her back together over and over again. It reminded him of some of the experiments Paxton subjected him and Dash. He shook his head. That was the past, this was the present. And in the present, he had a young girl to look after. Stain nodded. I wasn't going to kill her, I'm not a monster. So, I got her out of there and destroyed as much of their equipment as I could. But Eri used her quirk during the escape. I used mine to paralyze her, but the damage had already been done. I had gotten younger. Then Overhaul sent Midoriya after me. His quirk, Nidasight, gives him the properties of animals in the Midoriya kingdom, such as jellyfish, which includes a complete lack of blood, he explained. I couldn't paralyze him, and, despite all my combat experience, I couldn't beat him. As I am now, he's too strong for me. If it wasn't for that woman, Inko I think her name was, I would be dead and Eri would have been recaptured. For a hero, she reacted quite quickly. Actually, Inko isn't a hero, Nizu said. Just a housewife whose husband works on the moon. Her daughter, on the other hand, is currently in training to become a hero. Are you sure about that? Stain asked, because she had the right instincts, and reacted quickly. Just needs to hold back on the testicle removal threats. That's not exactly heroic. I can assure you, Inko is currently not a pro hero, Nizu said, but, I must say, I am glad that you got Eri out of there. We can protect her from this Overhaul there. But, now I must ask, what are we going to do with you? He said, to be honest, I should leave you to the police to deal with. No doubt you'll be going to Tartarus for your crimes. But, due to your de-aged state, physically, you qualify for UA's villain rehab program. What? Well, you are currently 15, are you not? Nizu said, perfectly legal age to be allowed to participate in the villain rehab program. What? It will have to be of your own volition. I can't force you to join the program, Nizu said, but it can't hurt by offering a position to you. In fact, I have all the necessary paperwork with me now if you're interested. What? Please stop saying what Shota said, sounding annoyed. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask someone of your age who is classified as a villain, even with your body count. Stain could not believe what he was hearing. Nizu was offering him a place in UA's villain rehab program. Such programs had become a lot more popular after the HPSC lost a lot of its power, allowing a large number of young villains to reintegrate into society or become heroes without being thrown into prison. Why? Why would you want to redeem me? I've killed several heroes and crippled even more, Stain said with a frown. He wasn't sure why Nizu was even giving him this offer. He didn't deserve redemption, his mission left too much blood on his hands. The blood of fakes who pretended to be heroes, and numerous criminals and villains. He was the last person in the world who deserved redemption. An Argonaut has killed hundreds, Nizu replied. You're the only person in the world who has fought him and survived. You have information I can use to bring him down, and I would prefer not to have to take a trip to Tartarus every time I want to talk to you. Now don't get me wrong, this is personal. He has killed a close friend of mine and he needs to be brought down. But I know bringing Argonaut to justice will not bring 13 back, or the lives of all those he killed. So, I'm bringing him down so that he can never kill anyone else again. But what about the fakes? Stain said, still struggling to believe what Nizu was offering him, the false heroes who trick the public into believing they're heroes when they're only doing it for selfish reasons? Leave them to me, Nizu replied with a smile that unnerved Stain. I have less lethal means to deal with people like that. What I am offering you isn't a second chance, more like an opportunity to help bring down the most wanted villain in the world, as well as a chance to help the heroes of the future become what you call true heroes. So, what do you say, Kaizo Makaguro? Do you want a second chance? That will be it for this part. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment if you want part 23. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next one.